One ongoing debate in Christianity centers around the existence of hell. Does it exist? Is there a literal hell in which souls are cast to be tortured forever? What exactly is hell? Is it a lake of fire, or just a permanent removal from God's presence? Where is hell located? Is it a separate realm of existence, or a physical location beneath the ground? What is its purpose? Is it an eternal punishment for the wicked, or does it simply destroy the unworthy? The Old Testament doesn't seem to hold much information on the topic. There's Sheol, a dim parallel world where all souls go after death, but that's hardly hell. And the New Testament isn't much better. It only contains vague references to a place that might be interpreted as hell. Yet early Christian theologians seemed certain of its existence, purpose, and location. What's more interesting is that their references to this terrible place were rather consistent. So where did these early influencers draw their information, if not from the Bible? And did this source have as much to say about heaven? I'm your host Jason, and you're listening to Dragons in Genesis. In the last episode, we learned that Enoch had a vision. The grandfather of Noah saw the orderly creation, how the luminaries of the sky obeyed the covenant which governs the universe. This detail seemed important, though we're not yet sure why. This obedience of the luminaries, the sun and moon and stars, is connected with the obedience of the seasons. The food harvests are tied into this orderly creation narrative, as all things must come in their appropriate time, including the ripening of the fruit on the trees. Then we were told that some of these luminaries were disobedient. These rebellious stars were wicked angels, sons of El Elyon, the great high god of Israel, who set the cosmos in order. His rebellious sons gave forbidden knowledge to humanity and had sex with human women. Though these two actions may seem entirely different, they may have been two versions of the same tradition. In the Eden story, we saw how sex was linked with forbidden knowledge. Their actions corrupted the perfect creation and introduced evil into the world. Enoch then sees a vision of the destruction caused by these fallen angels. The forbidden knowledge causes war and misuse of magic, while the abominable offspring of the Watchers and the women grow to enormous size and begin eating people. The earth itself cries out to the heavens for an end to the destruction. The cries of the world reach all the way to heaven, where the archangels chastise El Elyon for allowing such evil to occur. El then gives them instructions on what to do concerning the Watchers. Enoch sees how the Watchers will be dealt with in the future. The leaders will be rounded up by the archangels and cast into pits beneath the earth and covered with jagged stones. Aziel, one of the leaders, will take the blame for all sin, and so all sin must be consigned to him in the future, giving us the origin for the scapegoat sacrifice. The human-angel hybrids known as the Nephilim will be destroyed in a great cataclysm which will come in Noah's time, but humanity and the animals will survive. Then, in the final days of the world, the angels who caused all this corruption and misery will be dealt with. They'll be cast into a great fiery pit and destroyed. The wicked who followed them on earth will follow them into the pit, and the righteous will be rewarded with long life. Heaven and earth will then be renewed, and the righteous will live on a newly made world and look up at a newly made heaven. This imagery of the Watchers being imprisoned below the ground and then meeting their destruction in pits of fire, along with the wicked who follow them, would serve as inspiration for later writers to imagine an eternal flame below the ground where these angels would live forever. Originally about a sudden destruction, this idea would gradually morph into the concept of eternal punishment in both Zoroastrianism and Christianity. This is the author's hope for things to come. The wicked who are currently in power and seen to be corrupt will hopefully be cast from their lofty perch, and the righteous, those more in line with the author's theology, will regain their prominent position and thus be restored. Only then would the world and the proper order of things be set right, and the divine creation would obey its neat and tidy arrangement. The covenant would be restored. These themes will become more fleshed out and apparent as we continue our study of the Book of Enoch. Now that we're all caught up, let's get this show started, because we have a lot to cover. In chapter 12, we get a message for the Watchers. Enoch, we are told, was taken up to heaven and could no longer be found on earth, as we first saw in Genesis 5:21. We're told that he was among the holy ones and the Watchers. Here's the first reference to good angels also being called Watchers. So Watchers aren't only the wicked angels who live on earth. What we may be seeing here is a reference to a certain class of angels. Enochic theology is very neat and orderly, everything in its place and a place for everything. Watchers may be a type of angel tasked with earthly affairs, like watching over people. The complex angel theology of Enoch has guardian angels, the angels tasked with looking after individuals, along with others who move the stars along rails in the sky and open up the gates in the firmament to send wind and rains across the world. So Watchers may be angels who are concerned with earthly affairs, and we'll see more about this in later chapters. This would explain why the angels who were on earth and defiled themselves with humans are always called Watchers. The defilers were a subclass of angel who watched the world. That's just my understanding of it, so take the supposition with a grain of salt. So Enoch is in heaven among the holy ones, who are angels, and the Watchers, who are also angels, though there's some distinction between the two that isn't exactly clear in this section. Here in the text, in the beginning of chapter 12, Enoch is called Enoch the scribe. This designation will show up again, and it's an important role for this character. As we'll see later, a man who writes in a heavenly book is integral to their theology and likely recalls a sacred duty of the old high priest. Enoch is given a message to deliver to the Watchers who defiled themselves with human women and corrupted the perfect creation. This also is a role of note. Usually it was an angel who delivered messages from heaven. The word angel literally means messenger, though here a mortal man assumes the role of a messenger of heaven. Enoch, as we'll later see, continually blurs the line between man and angel to the point of erasing it entirely. He is to tell the Watchers on earth that they have brought destruction to the world, and because of that, they shall have no peace. And since they love their monstrous children, these are the mile-high Nephilim, they shall be forced to watch as their children are destroyed. If you remember from the last episode, we had two different versions of corruption. In one version, Simhaza is the leader and the angels sired demigods with human women, and this is a reference to that version of the tale. But when Enoch goes back to Earth to speak with the angels, the narrative switches. Now, Aziel is the leader, and when Enoch delivers his message to the angels, he speaks of Aziel's sin of forbidden knowledge, not of Simhaza's sin of interbreeding. Aziel is told he will be bound by the archangels and cast into a dark pit because of the forbidden divine knowledge that he shared with humanity. This story of Aziel, defying the wishes of El Elyon and giving knowledge of metalworking, magic, astronomy, medicine, and the like to humanity, which results in their creation of civilization, is a strong parallel to the Greek myth of Prometheus. And such a parallel may be a contributing factor for the compilers of the Old Testament deciding to omit this legend. Enoch then addresses all the Watchers, and they tremble in fear before him. This shows us that Enoch is no ordinary man, and it foreshadows a scene we'll encounter later, which shows that he has power over the angels. This also foreshadows Enoch's later identity, which we'll get into toward the end of the Book of Parables. At this point in the story, the Watchers show remorse for their actions and they ask Enoch to petition Yahweh on their behalf. This detail reflects a view of angels that are far more human than is seen in either Judaism or Christianity. They have desires and emotion and regret. So just as Enoch wrote the message given to him in the heavens, here he pens the petition from the Watchers begging forgiveness. He's living up to his title of the scribe. Enoch then leaves the presence of the Watchers and goes to the waters of Dan, southwest of Harmon, and reads the petition over and over until he falls into a trance. We see a similar scene with Moses in Exodus 18, when he sits day by day beside a stream in the wilderness of Kadesh, listening to court cases, and then listening to the stream to help him pass correct judgment. Or Deborah in Judges 4, who did the same with a palm tree. This was an ancient practice of oracles, to sit near a babbling brook or beneath a tree on a windy day and listen to the white noise and allow that to lure them into a trance in which they'd be granted visions and commune with spirits or a deity. Here, Enoch uses the waters of Dan, which feed into the Sea of Galilee, and the recitation of the petition of the Watchers to enter a trance and thus contact Yahweh. The waters of Dan refers to a group of tributaries that run down from the mountains in northeast Israel and feed into the river Dan, which empties into the Sea of Galilee. If you get a chance, look up photos from this region. The area is surprisingly lush, and I could certainly imagine a group of Bedouins choosing this location as the setting for the Garden of Eden. During his trance, Enoch has a vision of chastisement for the Watchers. He awoke and returned to the Watchers and recounted his dream vision. Then he reprimanded them on behalf of the voice which he had heard in his dreams. The first 7 verses in chapter 14 recount the reprimand given to Enoch by the Holy Great One, El Elyon, to deliver to the Watchers. It's presented as divine knowledge that's properly given as opposed to improperly given knowledge handed down by Aziel. It is to be spoken by men and to be understood by the heart. We're told that man was created and was given the power of understanding of the word of wisdom. If you recall my episodes on First Temple theology, you'll remember that wisdom wasn't just the product of the mind. Wisdom was the aspect of Asherah, the wife of El Elyon, the Holy Spirit and the Lady of Jerusalem. Through her, men could understand the secrets of the divine world. This scene hints at an early mystery cult in Judaism, where secrets were held by members and the initiates must strive to attain higher rank before they could be allowed to discover them. Hidden understanding was a key feature of mystery religions. And we'll take a closer look at Lady Wisdom when we cover chapter 42 of this book. We're also told here that Enoch has been given the power to reprimand the Watchers. This is another instance where the text indicates the future importance of this character. Now that Enoch has done his job as scribe and recorded their petition, he will bring that task to a close by delivering the Holy Great One's reply. The petition has been rejected. El Elyon has decided that the Watchers will never again ascend into heaven. They will be bound to the earth for all eternity. This eternity isn't exactly eternity, as it will only last as long as the world lasts. Eternity apparently had a different meaning back then. They must also watch as their children, the giant demigods that were killing all the people and animals and drinking each other's blood, are destroyed. This would be done in a number of ways, including giving them weapons and inciting war between them so that they kill each other off. Then the remainder would be wiped out in a worldwide flood. The Watchers would receive no mercy, even though they begged, wept, and prayed for forgiveness. It may seem rather harsh, but I suppose that's the price one pays for ruining a perfectly good universe. At this point, the text abruptly flashes back to the vision that Enoch had while at the waters of Dan. This jarring transition may indicate a point where the compilers stitched together multiple scenes to create a continuous narrative. If you read chapter 14, you'll understand what I mean. The first 7 verses are talking about Enoch delivering a message, and then suddenly in verse 8, we are back inside of Enoch's vision, and that vision drags on until you forget all about the message being delivered to the fallen angels. The vision scene does cover the message to the watchers, but then his vision continues to show Enoch the heavens and the entire created universe, and it's not over until the end of chapter 36. So the interruption to the narrative lasts 22 chapters and concludes the Book of the Watchers, so we never really hear back from them. So let's get started on Enoch's visionary vision. While Enoch's vision in the second half of the Book of Watchers does occasionally reference his message to the Watchers, it is also filled with temple imagery. The author is giving us a view of the Jerusalem temple, which is no longer accessible to all who once worshipped there. During the various reforms which occurred over the course of several centuries, different groups of priests rose to power and were later cast out. The authors of this book belong to one such group, and this offers a glimpse of what was lost. If you recall from previous episodes on the topic of the First Temple, such as episode 35, objects on earth were dim replicas of objects found in the heavens. The Jerusalem temple wasn't the house of God on earth. It was an earthly version of the actual house of God that existed in the heavens. The real temple wasn't made of brick and mortar, but was constructed of much finer materials, as we'll soon see. So when Enoch tells us of the heavenly temple, he's telling us of an imagined home of the gods and of the earthly building which his order no longer had access to. In 1 Enoch 14:8, Enoch is enveloped in a cloud of mist to be taken up to heaven. This is symbolic of the cloud of incense that the high priest would use to enter the Holy of Holies, and thus ascend to the spiritual plane in the first temple. We saw another version of this in Exodus 24:18, when Moses entered the cloud to ascend Mount Sinai, and thus commune with Yahweh. These scenes of ascension through a cloud are what the temple ritual was designed to replicate. Enoch is then driven by the course of the stars and lightning, which were painted on the ceiling of the temple. The first temple, like many ancient temples, had celestial images painted on the ceiling, such as the sun, moon, and constellations. Here we find that the Israelite ideal temple was no different. Astrology was important to the Jews at one point, and the Book of Enoch preserves this memory. Enoch is lifted up by the winds and carried up to heaven, where he sees a great house. The word house is used throughout Enoch to refer to the temple. Extensive use of symbolism is one of the defining characteristics of apocalyptic writing, so they often use one word to mean something entirely different. After all, apocalyptic writing is all about hidden meanings. This house has walls made of crystal and covered in mosaics. The ceiling held the path of the stars. The paths here on the ceiling of the heavenly temple define the paths that the stars in the firmament would take. The ceiling also holds fiery cherubim. Old Testament angels weren't fat little babies with wings, but monstrous entities made of flames, wings, and eyes. The entire temple is surrounded by fire, which is probably not what you would expect for a heavenly palace of the gods. We may now associate fire with Satan and hell, but it was an important element in the first temple. The presence of Yahweh was indicated by holy lamps in the first temple, lamps which were removed by reformists. Yahweh was also associated with fire back in Exodus when he led the Israelites out of Egypt, and his volcano imagery has been discussed countless times on this podcast. And much of the imagery seen in this section of Enoch will be seen again in Revelation 4:6 and 21:10 through 12, which holds another vision of the temple written centuries later. Enoch then fell on his face and trembled in fear. He was shown another vision of a second house, this one even greater than the first. Now, try not to think of this second temple as one that comes after the first one, or one that exists beside the first. The first temple depicted here in chapter 14 isn't a vision of Solomon's temple, while the second is a vision of a rebuilt temple commissioned by the Persians. The first temple shown here is a vision of the heavenly temple, upon which the earthly temple is based. And this second temple in his vision is a vision of another heavenly temple, upon which the first heavenly temple is based. Confused? It's okay. In Enochic theology, there were 7 heavens above the firmament. Each heaven was more splendid than those beneath it, and each held duplicates of the beings and objects contained in the higher heavens. So the 7th heaven, the highest heaven, contained the original temple, and each heaven beneath it was a less splendid duplicate. Each layer was a bit less glorious all the way down to the first heaven, and the very bottom layer, the firmament, was of this world, which contained the least glorious copies of all, the copies on earth. So here, Enoch is seeing a version of the temple from a higher layer of heaven. The floor of this temple was made of fire, and the ceiling was lightning, and it held the paths of the stars. In its center, it held a crystal throne with wheels that shone like the sun, and on it were the images of cherubim. This is the heavenly version of the chariot throne of the first temple, which was also absent once the new temple was constructed. It's also seen in a vision in Ezekiel chapter 1 that depicts the removal of the chariot throne. This is the object that people like Georgios Tsoukalos understand as a flying saucer. In his vision, Enoch sees rivers of fire flowing from beneath this throne, and we learn from the book 3 Enoch that there are 7 such rivers of fire. In scenes like this, the rivers would correspond to earthly rivers that were important to the author and the audience, such as those rivers mentioned in Genesis 2, the Pishon, the Kishon, the Tigris, and the Euphrates, along with the Jordan River, which Joshua crossed before the founding of Israel, the River Dan, where Enoch sat to have this vision, and which fills the Sea of Galilee, and the Lachish, which empties into the Mediterranean near the city of Ashdod, and is also an important religious center mentioned repeatedly in the Old Testament, like the Book of Judges. And the reason that these rivers are made of fire is simple. If you've ever gone camping in the desert, or any place far away from urban centers with their light pollution, and stared up at a cloudless sky, you can see the thick streak of the Milky Way. Many ancient cultures imagined this as a heavenly river, sometimes made of snow, ice, fire, or in the case of the Egyptians, semen. Here, the heavenly rivers of flame spill out from beneath the throne of God. Upon this throne sat he who is great in glory. His robes are white as snow and shone more brightly than the sun. White garb, as we'll see later, is standard dress for heavenly beings and for men who wish to emulate them. It is also a sign of the transfiguration from a fleshly body to a spiritual one. When one transforms from a man to an angel, they are described as casting off their garments of flesh and dressing in robes of white. This heavenly scene of the enthroned figure is referenced again in Matthew 25:31. Now, none of the angels could enter or behold the face of this God, and no flesh could behold him, a concept mentioned in 1 Timothy 6:16. This place where no angels are permitted to go is the Holy of Holies, the center of the first temple. We see this again in 1 Peter 1:12 when it speaks of a place, quote, into which angels long to look, unquote. Here, Enoch is surrounded by a great fire, and another fire stood before him inside the temple. The presence of a great fire as a centerpiece of the temple is strikingly similar to the fire temples of Zoroastrianism. Countless holy ones, angels, stood around, and Yahweh called to Enoch to approach. But he had to be carried by angels because he was terrified. Enoch is told not to be afraid and to deliver a message to the watchers. He is told to tell them that the watchers should intercede on behalf of men, and not men on behalf of the watchers. Then the text references the Semihaza tradition by asking rhetorically why the watchers have left heaven to have sex with women. They were eternal beings, but have defiled themselves with women. This implies that the watchers are no longer immortal. This seems to be similar to the issue of category confusion we saw in Leviticus. Immortal beings aren't supposed to reproduce. Men have wives so that their children may carry on their name. But this is not for eternal beings. This also echoes the fears at the end of the Eden story when the humans who had learned reproduction were cast out before they could also eat from the tree of life and thus become immortal. The text states that the Watchers were once spiritual and immortal, implying they traded celestial bodies for bodies made of flesh and for procreation. We see this in Luke 20:34-36, when it said that children of the earth have children, but the resurrected do not marry because they are equal to the sons of God. Immortal beings are not appointed wives. We're then told that the giants of the earth will be called evil spirits, because spirits will come out of their bodies when they're killed. These spirits will dwell forever on earth to afflict, oppress, attack, destroy, and to cause war. They are the cause for all of the evils of the world, and their spirits shall rise up against the people. This tradition is also preserved in the Book of Jubilees. The flesh of the giants shall be destroyed in the upcoming flood, but their spirits will wander the earth until the day of great judgment. See Matthew 8:28-29. Then we return to the story of Aziel and the forbidden knowledge tale. Enoch is to tell the watchers that they didn't know all the mysteries of heaven, but they only knew the worthless information that brought evil to the earth. This is another reference to the hidden wisdom given only to the elect, and again might hint at the possibility of a mystery cult. And this section is seen in Genesis 6:1-8, immediately prior to the story of Noah's flood. The holy ones, angels, appeared to Enoch as men and took him to a place of darkness on a mountaintop that reached to heaven. This is the holy mountain of God upon which the sacred grove of Eden and El Elion's house rested. Think of it like the Jewish version of Olympus. It moved around depending on who was writing the story. The people of the city of Ugarit called it Mount Zephon. After that city was abandoned, they named the mountain outside Jerusalem to Zaphon. But other mountains were also said to be the home of God, including Mount Horeb, Seir, Gerizim, etc. From the top of this mountain, Enoch can see the treasury where all the stars are stored, along with the thunder and the watery depths. Now, a quick note on Jewish cosmology. Rain, snow, wind, lightning, stars, thunder, anything that was in the sky and came and appeared at intervals was kept in storehouses outside the clear dome of the firmament. These things would be released by angels into our world at appointed times. This concept is laid out more explicitly later on in Enoch. So, from this high vantage, Enoch can see the edges of the world where the storehouses hold the various resources. He can see the water of life that nourishes the world and the great fires of the west that receive the setting sun. The source of all the rivers of the world and the mountains and the Tehom can also be seen. And the Tehom is the source of the waters of the deep. It was the belief that the waters of the deep could come up from the earth like a great geyser, and that is how Noah's flood occurred. The capstone that plugged this fountain and thus held back the floodwaters was the foundation of the Jerusalem temple. And so the temple itself was seen as a great seal that prevented universal destruction. And that is why their devotion to this temple was so important. Enoch sees a vision of the heavenly mountains, the storehouses of the wind, and the foundations of the earth. The foundations are the stone pillars that hold up the disk of the world and the pillars that support the firmament. We're told here that the winds of heaven move the sun and the stars. These were thought to be inside of our atmosphere and pushed by the same forces that push the clouds. He even sees the edge of the firmament where it connects to the edge of the earth. Enoch then sees 7 stars that resemble burning mountains falling from the sky to land in a place in the desert. These are fallen angels, and their place in the wilderness is their prison. They transgressed the commandments and did not come out at their appropriate time. It states that these stars rose in the sky at the wrong time. This is important. Remember the intro in the first 5 chapters when I said that the stage setting was important? The idea that nature followed a set course, but then some stars revolted and did not follow the commandments? This sentence right here, that some of these stars came out at the wrong time, is a part of that. Keep these things in mind, because I believe they're far more important than the evil angels. And you're not going to find this information anyplace else, because I can't find where anyone else is talking about this. So keep it in mind, and I'll bring it all together once you have all of the pertinent details. Anyway, because these 7 stars came out at the wrong time, they were cast down. After this, we move into chapter 20, which is only 8 verses long and contains a list of the holy watchers. Remember when I said that not all watchers were evil and it might indicate a group of angels with dominion over the earthly realm? Here's more information concerning that. First, there's Uriel, who's in charge over the world, turmoil, and terror. There's Raphael, who rules over the spirits of men. Ragiel, who's responsible for vengeance and the world of the luminaries. Michael, who's over the virtues of man and chaos. Serachiel, who is over the spirits who sin. Gabriel, who is over paradise, serpents, and the cherubim. And finally, Remiel, who is over those who rise. Now let's explain some of this. The world of the luminaries that Ragiel rules over is our world, which extends up to the firmament. The level of the luminaries, the sun and the moon, is where the evil angels dwell. They won't be moved below ground until later. So he's in charge of vengeance over their domain. Serachiel is over the spirits who sin, which is a reference to the disembodied spirits of the giants which roam the earth until the day of judgment. The serpents that Gabriel rules over alongside paradise and the cherubim are the seraph serpents, the winged angel snakes that Yahweh used to punish the Israelites in Numbers 21:6. And those who rise are most likely the righteous men who ascend to heaven to become angels. After this, Enoch is taken to see the time before creation. The same phrasing is used here. The place is chaotic and void. This is similar to Moses going to witness the creation on Mount Sinai before being given instructions on how to build the temple, which, coincidentally, Enoch will next be confronted with a great deal of temple imagery, just as Noah was. This should come as no surprise to you since we've already discussed how the first temple represented the 6 days of creation. Anyway, Enoch comes to this formless place where there is no heaven above nor earth below, and he sees the 7 stars fall from the sky like mountains of fire, and is told by Uriel they're to be bound together for 10,000 years. I haven't found any information on this, but I do believe that this, and the earlier reference to the 7 fallen angels that resemble mountains of fire, is a third tradition concerning the fallen angels. Just as we had the tradition of Simhaza with his 200 angels who came down to a mountain and then had sex with women, and then the tradition of Aziel who came down with 8 other angels to deliver divine knowledge, here we have 7 unnamed angels who were cast down for disobedience of the covenant, coming out at a time other than their appointed time. And here they're clearly cast out before the creation, whereas the 200 including Simhaza, or the 9 including Aziel, came down during the time of Enoch's father. I believe this story, the 7 unnamed angels cast down for coming out at the wrong time, is the original story. And it goes back to that important stuff I keep telling you to remember. I believe the other 2 traditions are derived from this story. Those stories have new details that were added to them to flesh out their respective traditions. After this, Enoch is taken to another place that's even more horrible. He trembles in fear at the sight of a great fire so vast he can see neither its source nor its edges. Uriel explains that he's filled with such dread because this place is a spectacle of pain, where the angels will be imprisoned. This scene is referenced in Daniel 7:9-11 and is the source of the concept of hell being created before the earth, which is taught by various Christian denominations, including the Catholics. Then Enoch is taken west to a great mountain with 4 smooth chambers inside. Here the souls of men will be stored until the day of judgment. There he sees the spirit of Abel petitioning for the descendants of Cain to be wiped from the earth. Enoch asked Raphael why there are 4 chambers, and the people are separated. Raphael tells him that 3 chambers are for the righteous, and each of those contains a bright spring. The 4th chamber is for the sinners who must suffer in great pain until the day of judgment for their sins. Those who curse shall suffer forever, while those who make petitions might be spared. See 2 Peter 3:7 and 2 Maccabees 12:41-45. This concept of people being separated and some given a second chance before going on to their final fate was first seen in Zoroastrianism, and this concept is the inspiration behind the Catholic doctrine of purgatory. Enoch is then taken to the western ends of the earth to see a great river of fire that runs through the heavens day and night. During the day, this is the orange sunset. At night, this is the band of the Milky Way. He then sees a magnificent sacred tree that gives out a pleasant fragrance and is covered in fruit that resembles dates. It sits atop the tallest mountain in the middle of a range of 7 mountains. He inquires about this tree, and the archangel Michael tells him that the mountain is the throne of God where he sits when he comes down to earth. No mortal is permitted to touch the tree until the great judgment. See Genesis 2:8-17. After the great judgment, the temple shall be transplanted from the heavenly mountain to the temple of Yahweh, the Holy King, where the fruit will be shared with the elect. The tree of knowledge is in Eden, which is in heaven, but will come down to earth when Yahweh reigns again. See Revelation 22, 1 through 3 and Ezekiel 47, 12. The elect shall rejoice and enter the holy place, the temple, and the fragrance from that tree, wisdom, shall enter them, and they shall have long lives on the earth. There will be no pain, no toil, no sorrow. This is what is prepared for the righteous. Let's unpack some of this. First, we see that the sacred grove of fragrant trees, the Garden of Eden, is in the heavenly realm. But the tree will eventually come to the earthly counterpart of this place, which is the Jerusalem temple. In their old mythology, Adam was not kicked out of a garden on earth in the Mediterranean. He was kicked out of a garden that was up in the heavens. That is why Adam's expulsion from the garden is referred to as the fall of man. He did not fall from grace, he fell from heaven. We also see a hint of predestination here. The elect are chosen to inherit this reward in advance. Then we see that Yahweh is directly connected with the throne of Israel and the divine kingship. He will sit on the throne. He is the holy king, and he will return to rule in the future. This is a longing for the lost divine royalty from before the Babylonian exile. We see a direct connection between properly given divine wisdom and earthly reward, and we see a promise of great things to come for those who follow the proper theology. Enoch then spends the next several chapters flying over the earth to see the entirety of creation, seeing mountains and valleys and trees. He also sees the gates of the firmament that let through the winds, rain, dew, frost, etc. There are gates to let the forces of nature into the world from the storehouses of heaven, and smaller gates for them to exit. He also saw each star as they came through the gates, and wrote down their names and their numbers and their schedule, and noted how they followed their prescribed courses and obeyed the order of the covenant. During all of this, he makes a return to the garden of the righteous to revisit the tree of wisdom. There are two massive trees there, and one is said to give great wisdom. It's as tall as a fir tree and gave fruit that resembled clusters of grapes. Here we have something interesting. Raphael tells Enoch that this was the tree that Enoch's mother and father ate from, and this act caused them to be cast from the garden of the righteous. This is a blatant reference to the fall of man we saw in Genesis 2 through 3. It's referenced here in Enoch as central to their theology, yet outside of Genesis 2 and 3, this theme is completely absent from the Old Testament. It is, however, referenced clearly in the New Testament in Romans 5. That concludes the Book of Watchers, the first part of 1 Enoch, and brings this episode to a close. Remember to like us on Facebook at facebook.com/dragonsandgenesis, where you can contact me with any questions or comments about the show, and also find an Amazon wish list with research material that will help me with future episodes. Check out the website at dragonsandgenesis.com for links to recent episodes and a list of books and lectures to help further your own understanding of these topics. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts, and leave us a good review. And as always, thank you for listening.